Hi, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Ken Cook, and I'm having yet another episode. Today's topic causes me to have episodes all the time. We're talking about the toxic forever chemicals that are in the water we drink, the soil we live off of, and in the products we use every day. They're even in all of us. In order to understand the sheer scope of our battle against these PFAS forever chemicals, I sat down with two very different people with two very important stories and perspectives on PFAS. First up, I speak with Diane Cotter. When Diane Cotter's husband, Worcester Fire Department Lieutenant Paul Cotter, became sick with the number one killer of firefighters, cancer, she had a lot of questions. Her questioning led to a series of staggering discoveries. Scores of sick firefighters, her husband's critically degraded firefighting turnout gear, and corporate influence at the highest levels of leadership in the firefighters union. In the second part of the episode, we are joined by entrepreneur, environmentalist, and skier Peter Arlen. When Peter learned how ski wax, formulated with forever chemicals, was pervading and contaminating the pristine mountains he loved, this former ski shop wax tech decided to go back to the drawing board and see if he couldn't come up with a safer formula. His company, MountainFlo, has been featured on Shark Tank and has grown to include several safe outdoor sports products that perform just as well and frequently better than the old toxic formulations. I think both of these conversations are essential to understanding the battle we're fighting here. You'll hear defendants of PFAS state that we need these chemicals, that there are no alternatives. But as you'll hear in my conversations with Diane and Peter, not only do we need to find safer, cleaner alternatives, but those alternatives are within our reach now. Let's jump in and see how far the rabbit hole goes. My guest today is someone who has caused me to have multiple episodes over the years, mostly all good. I tell people in the PFAS world, people who are fighting to protect our families and our health and our environment from PFAS, and I've said this very publicly, that Diane Cotter is a pain in the ass, but she's our pain in the ass. She is one of the most effective and fun activists working in this space. She's inspired. She's dogged. She has at every turn inspired me. And I've had the pleasure of meeting the hot firefighter she's married to, Paul Cotter, who is her inspiration and ally at the same time. But when you look across the history of the fight over discovering what's happening with these forever chemicals in our environment and what we can do about it, who's been affected, how they've been affected, unraveling all of those and more questions over the past decade, Diane Cotter, for me, has been at the center of it. So welcome to the show. I'm thrilled. We got a lot of ground to cover. I put you up there with my friend Erin Brockovich. She was on the show a little while back as someone who comes to this issue, from another walk of life, another framework entirely. I want to find out what the ingredients were that made you into the incredibly effective activist that you've become. Thanks for joining me.
Ken, I'm so humbled. I'm truly almost lost for words. I know we have been fighting side by side in this for a decade because it was EWG that came to my rescue along with I want to call him my ride or die guy, Rob Ballot, early on when we were really fighting alone and with Dr. Peasley. I'm doing great today. We've come a long way, baby.
That's right.
We've seen a new change in our union, and you and I know the story of the change over there, and we call it the greatest deception ever because it is. It's the greatest deception ever.
Let me go back a little bit. What were your influences that made made you the kind of person that steps out of your comfort zone or steps out of your personal life and into the public arena and takes on a fight. What do you think led to that?
I can tell you that the upbringing was traumatic. So I had a very traumatic childhood. That shaped me to be very private, Ken. I didn't want anybody seeing me, knowing me. And then, of course, that all changed when I had to come out of the shell to fight the fight.
That is absolutely amazing. I'm trying to go through the list of synonyms for reserved that none of which fit Diane Cotter that I know. I mean, reserved is maybe the last word in the English language that would come to spring to my lips. But obviously that trauma made you both very private and protective probably of the world that was closest to you and the stability that you did have and the love that you did have.
Yes.
With Paul. Yeah.
Oh,
so
my God. Yes.
When there's a knock on him.
Oh my God.
Out comes the warrior. Out comes the warrior.
100%. 100%. He's the fireman's fireman. He's just a big, rugged firefighter that loves the job, that lived for the job. My kids lived for his stories. We all lived for his stories. He'd sit us all around the table and, tell us the antics that they went through that day. And he was so great at the job.
So he, at the peak of his powers and his career, you get how do you receive the news? How do you hear the news about his cancer?
Yeah, that changed everything that moment.
Yeah.
We went to get the results of a biopsy he had because his PSA was elevated slightly, not even a full point, just slightly. But his nurse practitioner didn't like that. And I had thought, look at him. He's such a fit firefighter. There's nothing.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing in him that says that he's, got any concerns whatsoever because he had no symptoms. He didn't have any of the symptoms that come with prostate cancer. And that's why when we went for that meeting with his doctor, I thought, well, this is going to be quick. I'll be in and out. And the doctor says to Paul, well, yeah, it's cancer. And nothing could have prepared us for that moment. Because I know myself, I screamed, literally screamed, fell into a chair. And I watched my husband. I watched the sweat come out of every pore in his body, and he tore his polo shirt off, and his T-shirt was soaking wet, and he just sunk in a chair. Because you got to remember, in the fire service, when you hear that word, you don't think any stage other than the end stage.
Because it's the number one killer of firefighters, right?
Absolutely, Ken. Yes, absolutely. He had the surgery. The surgery was very successful. They excised the entire prostate with robotic surgery. As you know, Ken, he's a very proud man, and he carries a persona about him. He wears a flat top.
Look, when I first met the guy, I thought, first of all, he's just looks like he's as fit as a 19-year-old. I knew he had gone through cancer treatment, but he looked like he could climb up a 100-foot ladder right there.
Yeah.
I'm sure he probably still does.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's the real deal.
So he'll be so glad you said that.
Oh, please. Yeah.
But he suffered greatly with incontinence. And we never spoke about that because it was so private. We didn't want him to be humiliated. But I saw him first speak about it in David Ferry's article in Men's Health magazine. That was the first time I've seen him publicly address the incontinence. So what happened with Paul is you cannot be a firefighter and have stress incontinence. And that was the problem with returning to the job for him because you can't control that.
Yeah.
You're at a fire for 3 hours and you can't control yourself. That's horrifying. It's horrifying. What he's been through has been horrifying. He even had to fight for his pension because the cancer was gone. But they said to him, well, you don't have cancer anymore. You can come back to work. And he said, well, you all are here at this table. Each of you are wearing a suit. He said, I cannot wear a suit. I'm here in a long shirt with tails because I piss myself. Imagine that, Ken.
Yeah.
The reality for the prevalence of prostate cancer in Worcester fire was one day in 2019, I had joined a group of firewives. We were making braids to commemorate the 1999 Worcester 6 warehouse fire. I was sitting at a table with 6 women, and we were probably ages 35 to 65. And one of the girls said to me, what type of cancer does Paul have, Diane? And I said, prostate. Every woman at that table, Ken, lifted her head up to say, mine too. So that's when we knew something was so wrong.
Yeah, of course. So you're dealing with, together as a family, as a couple, you're dealing with this, you're fighting for the pension. When does the PFAS element come into all of this? That another big change in your life following the diagnosis, right?
So when Paul was in a reclining chair for weeks and weeks on end, and I had started to research firefighter cancer, and Boston had come out with so much information about firefighter cancer. And that kind of propelled me to look at all aspects of firefighters and cancer. But I came across this story about a firefighter who had succumbed to steam burns because his gear had degraded. So I thought, something clicked in my head, and I thought, degradation. Is that what happened to Paul? Because we had known about products of combustion and diesel exhaust, because those big rigs are inside the bays and the doors are closed and they're breathing those fumes. We knew about those things. I ran down the basement, ripped open his gear, took a flashlight, shone it through the crotch area. And while everything looked fine on the outside, there were these dime, quarter, and nickel-sized pieces of material missing.
From the innermost layer, the layer next to his skin.
Yes. So that's when I said, God, what is wrong here? I ran back upstairs, started searching the actual names of the turnout gear, and found a 1999 safety alert that the IAFF had put out, that they were recalling a moisture barrier. They were demanding a recall because it had degraded. So that led me to research Nomex, Kevlar. I started to email anybody, scientists, firefighters. Do we know why this is degrading? And I was emailing dozens, hundreds of people. And one of the parties that I emailed was Erin Brockovich. She said, Diane, I've gotten your emails, and I'm calling you because I have a New Hampshire fire chief that has 13 firefighters with cancer. She said to me, does the gear have PFOA or PFOS? I said, oh my God, I've never heard of either one of those. I ran to the computer and I Googled PFOA, PFOS turnout gear. Up pops something from the European Chemical Agency that they were already transitioning back in 2015 to a potential end of PFOA in PPE, personal protective equipment. That's when the signals started to fire in the brain, like, how do we not know about this here? Do we can't have this stuff here because we'd surely know about it if we did. So that's when the rabbit hole opened.
Yeah. You're down the rabbit hole.
Right.
You're heading down. So what were some of the major early waypoints for you?
Well, then we needed to find out if we had it in our gear or not, because we knew that the European gear contained it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to remove it. So
Yeah.
I looked through the National Fire Protection Association, which is a conglomerate of non-governmental organization that our manufacturers sit as the voting members of this organization that decides everything about turnout gear, from the balance of the helmet to the width of reflecting tape. I couldn't find any discussion about it. Back then you could get in and read easier than you can today. I think you need a password to get in and read these standards.
They probably call it the Diane Cotter password. It's probably actually got a term.
I bet it does.
Yeah.
I bet it does, Kim.
Yeah, this is the hole we plug because of that Cotter woman. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had a name for me. Absolutely.
More than one, maybe.
Yeah, you better.
We can't repeat them. It's a family. This is a family podcast.
Yes, sir. So then at that point in time, we went to the union. I went to, our local group in Worcester. I went to the PFFM, and they were as curious as I was. We had a social media campaign with Station Pride. I wrote an article for Station Pride titled "The Real Cancer in Your Gear." It went viral. And that's when we really saw who the players were in that moment, because
they came back at you.
9 days later, they were circulating propaganda saying we're going to need ammo. This is circulating, but it got so much worse. But just when I thought it wouldn't get any worse, it would get so much worse. And then I aligned with Rob Ballot.
Rob is the attorney. He was a defense attorney by trade, and through family connections, he was the attorney who discovered the nightmare of Teflon chemical pollution in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and nearby Ohio. How did you connect with Rob, and how did that unfold?
Well, I sent him 160 emails, and I kept.
But what did you do on the second week? What was the second week? How many did you send then?
I kept thinking, he's going to block me. You'd have to block me at that point in time. Every time I'd hit send, I'd think, oh yeah, he's going to block me. And I would send him, pictures of our firefighting journals where they would be open to our firefighters that had, DuPont saying, it's what's inside the gear that counts. And, we're your best defense. And, it was just so now, 9 years into this, I know what that was. It was so predictable. But I remember one day he replied, fascinating. He just said, fascinating. And I had no idea that he was so neck deep still, because that was 2017 and I had seen all the work that he had done with EWG. And I knew the two of you were like a tag team. So I thought if I could get the two of them on this issue, it's got to come out of my hands, because the union wasn't having anything to do with it. From 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, finally in 2021, that all changed. So Rob took this on with a vengeance. And I had a firefighter that had written me a letter about prostate cancer. And this firefighter went into great detail about how prostate cancer affected him very privately in a sexual manner.
I think you sent that to me with his permission.
Yes, I did.
I seem to recall.
Yep.
I was very moved by it.
Yeah. It took my breath away, because it was everything that we were dealing with that my husband wouldn't say publicly in that regard. We've had to share so much. And I think that Rob read that letter, and the next thing I knew, there was a 195-page letter by Rob to the EPA, CDC, ATSDR, and U.S. Attorney General with firefighter Jeffrey Herms, C8 Science Panel Dr. Brooks, and they were threatening to sue the EPA, and if they didn't start medical monitoring and health studies for firefighters. That was 2018. About 6 months later, Rob and myself had a meeting with Jimmy McGovern in Worcester. Rob was on the phone.
Your congressman,
yes,
Jim McGovern.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the best.
Yes. What happened was the CDC then did their first set of studies in Pease Air Force or Pease Seaport, but they omitted firefighters from the study because firefighters were occupationally exposed to PFAS.
Yeah.
As soon as Rob found that out, he wrote a 48-page letter of protest and saying, you've got to get them their studies. They must have their studies. Fast forward to October, I think, of 2018, he filed that first nationwide lawsuit with Fire Chief Kevin Hardwick for everyone in the USA.
Yeah. Knowing that we have so many colleagues now across the country that are stepping up, and they're sad to say more and more of them every day because this stuff's being discovered so many places.
Right.
Give us a little more granular detail about the struggle inside the firefighters union and your efforts to.
Oh boy.
This is
Get the tea.
One of the Diane Cotter moments.
What had happened during those years is Graham Peasley, Dr. Peasley from Notre Dame, he agreed to test the gear for us. And I sent him a brand new set.
And it's tricky chemistry. When you read his papers, as of someone who's had a fair amount of chemistry, but back in the day, but even so, the kind of analysis he does is not the kind of analysis just any old lab could do.
Right.
It's really sophisticated and tricky.
That PIGE, I can't say the word, machine, he built it at Notre Dame and it takes up 3 rooms. I mean, it's just wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
So he agreed to test the gear. He had never dealt with the fire community before, and he had me send him samples, which I did. And he sent back an email, said, oh, Diane, there's more than trace amounts in here. So that's what industry was saying, because Rob Ballot was challenged by Lion Gear when Rob brought it up to the fire service that there was a problem if this stuff is in the gear. And I remember because Columbus Dispatch, I think, published a letter.
Michael Hawthorne.
Published a letter that was written about Rob by Lion Gear, I believe it was, that said there's only trace amounts in that gear. This attorney is an ambulance chaser and causing hysterics. And that's when Rob came back with that, that haymaker where he says, trace amounts. No one has ever defined what is a known safe level of a carcinogen. So I took that, I was blowing that up and throwing that everywhere. But Graham said, Diane, there's so much in here. It's by volume. I had no idea what that meant because I didn't know what ppm or parts per million.
Yeah.
I had no idea. He said, you're going to need a bigger study. So we then put together a big study. I had all these firefighters across the country that were watching to see what this crazy girl was doing. They said, we're going to help you, Diane. So we got all the 30 sets of gear. They all made their way off to Graham Peasley's lab, and his students were putting it on. And he said, oh, God, please don't put that on because you're getting copious amounts of it off in your hands. The study was published. The denials were coming. Between there, we saw the collaboration of the then administration of the labor union with Lion Gear, because Lion Gear was then very strong into the labor union's advertising and support and supporting the cancer summits and whatnot. And it's very well noted that they were very generous with trips and perks and incentives, so to speak. It's part of the sales incentive program that goes along with that.
We call it influence peddling in Washington.
Yes.
But that's right.
Yes. But what happened with this woman is that I had no chain of command other than I knew that I was really upsetting the status quo within the union. What we were seeing is the pushback was so strong that Lion Gear came up with its own study about turnout gear and PFAS, and that was done by Exponent. I have a friend out in California, Alameda County, Jeff Kanabe. He wanted to see that study. So he called Lion Gear to see that study because they wouldn't let you see it unless they could watch you read it. They flew from Dayton, Ohio to Alameda County, California, so that Jeff Kanabe, the PPE specialist, could see the study. While there, they get a call from a third party, and it's Dr. Paul Cotter. And he said to Jeff Kanabe, "Don't you worry about this, Jeff. It's like volleyballs and tennis balls. It's too big to go through your skin." A couple months later, we see that same dialogue being promulgated on the stage.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, we were seeing that the union was greatly influenced by Lion Gear and others. Lion had produced a statement saying the IAFF read the science and agreed there was not enough to worry about.
Right. And that IAFF is the name of the union,
Yes.
right? It's the
International Association of Firefighters. In 2017, 2018, the union had essentially asked DuPont if this was okay. Is she crazy? And they said, "Oh, yeah, we've tested it. There's nothing to worry about here."
Oh, yeah. It's the playbook, right? It's the
It
playbook.
was the playbook. But the best was my dear friend, Bobby Halton. Chief Bobby Halton was editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering. That's our biggest media in the fire service. Biggest. Firefighter Nation, Firehouse, all of them are under the umbrella of Fire Engineering. Bobby and I used to spar because he wouldn't reply to me saying, "When are you going to do something about this, Bobby Halton?" And one day, like you, he took me up on a conversation.
He gave up. He gave up. Resistance was futile.
Yes, sir. We became fast friends. And Bobby said, he called me one day and he said, "I'm worried about you, kid." And I said, "Why, Bobby?" And he said, "I was asked to be at a meeting to mess with you." So I didn't give it too much thought. I knew things were white hot around me. I had been boxing 24/7 for a few years now. But then one day he gave up a name. Now, Bobby passed in December 2022. So he's been gone a year now. And I'll never know if this was intentional or not. But he said, "Kid, that was John Granby of Lion Gear, the vice president of corporate responsibility, that told me that he was going to a meeting in the IAFF headquarters to mess with you."
Yeah.
So,
yeah. When did you finally feel like you had a breakthrough?
we saw it coming with the firefighters themselves. We had firefighters from California to Texas to Washington State, because you got to remember, we have a lot of firefighters that sell the gear. They're the salespeople.
Yeah.
And
of course,
they may be promulgating this industry agenda still.
Yeah, they're conflicted, and and they probably in many cases didn't know about the issue until they heard about it through the work you were doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What we ended up doing in Massachusetts was there was a lawsuit filed by a law firm in California. They filed the first lawsuit on firefighter turnout gear. And I think what's fascinating about that organization is their of counsel is a battalion chief turned attorney, and that's Rick Seal.
Yeah.
So he took this on, and the law firm took up the mantle, and now we have thousands of firefighters, including Paul, and I don't know how many. I think I last heard there was 10,000 firefighters suing for the turnout gear exposure. But they all got lumped into the MDL.
Yeah, that's the way it works. But that case is ongoing, right? I mean,
they've chosen the bellwether plaintiffs, I guess, for the personal injury aspect. And from what I read is that the personal injury lawsuits they're hoping will be heard in 2024. So
okay.
what I'm
Stay tuned.
yes.
Yeah.
And the way that we've seen 3M and DuPont work is that there's a settlement. I'm hoping that for the personal injury, it's a different story. I'm hoping that the firefighters will fight this fight for your brothers and your sisters. Fight it right in the courthouse. Let's find out who knew what and when they knew it, what they did to obstruct
Make it public.
Make it public.
Yeah. There's a million things that need to be addressed here to make the world safe from PFAS and phase out this family of chemicals and move to something safer. We like to say around here that at EWG, we're driven by facts, not emotion, but sometimes the facts really piss you off, right?
100%.
And so,
yeah.
So tell everybody what keeps an advocate of your caliber, which is the highest. When you wake up and you see some bad news about something else that's happened as a result of PFAS exposure, what combination of emotions and grit and determination kicks in for you?
With this issue, because I work largely now behind a computer, it's the messages, Ken. For example, if you read a new article and then I'll receive messages, not just from firefighters who have cancer, but their spouses or their widows who are raising children that really we talk so little about. And that's my line in the sand is, I could tell you that this devastated us financially, but when I hear myself say that, I think, shut up, Diane. My God, there are widows. I can't tell you how many widows that I speak to, Ken.
Of course.
And those are the people that, I am so not motivated because Ed Kelly has the ball. He's doing so phenomenal with this. He doesn't need Diane Cotter pushing him along anymore. But I do have a network, and that network still requires connections. And I like to make connections for people that are still very much involved in this work. So we continue to just go day to day, and the motivation is there. I've got a son who's a firefighter. My son works on my husband's truck.
I have to tell you, in my line of work and in my career, when I've come across people like you who have just dug in, didn't come to it professionally, didn't come to it by choice, but once you got into it, you've made such a difference, such a huge difference. And I know Paul is proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud to know you. And I'm so grateful that you gave me time today to be on the program. I look forward to having people hear this story from you.
Know this, we wouldn't be where we are in this fight without EWG. And I don't say anything I don't mean.
Oh, you're very sweet. Well, I just want to thank you again for being on the episode. I have them all the time. And sometimes they're triggered by things that make me very angry. And sometimes they're triggered by things that make me feel very inspired. And that's what this episode's about. It's about inspiration and sharing your story. So, Diane, you're the best. Folks, the one, the only, the inspirational hero of mine, Diane Cotter. And now let's learn more about what can be done on the manufacturing and consumer side to get rid of PFAS in my conversation with Peter Arlen, founder and CEO of MountainFlo EcoWax. Our guest today, Peter Arlen, who is the founder and CEO at MountainFlo EcoWax, a company that's been on my radar screen for a long time because Peter has been one of the pioneers that stands out in my mind as taking on the PFAS industrial complex. And he decided that he was going to make a distinctive contribution that allows him to ski even more than he would have if he didn't start MountainFlo EcoWax. Welcome to the show.
Ken, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So I watched part of the episode on Shark Tank where MountainFlo, where you were presenting to them and they were fighting over you. Tell us what that experience was like. And was Shark Tank instrumental in helping you get to an elevated level in the industry in terms of the market.
Yeah, it really was a great experience, both personally and for the brand. And, to be honest, going in there, I didn't know how it was going to go. A, we're talking about skiing, which not everybody does. B, we're talking about a small part of skiing, which is ski wax. And then even smaller, a plant-based ski wax. Right? There's a good chance that this was just going to fall on its face and nobody would know what I was talking about. But it ended up being the exact opposite. And almost everybody skied. And in addition to that, they were familiar with the problem. They skied in Europe, where this is a popular topic of conversation. And so they were totally up to date on what was going on with PFAS ski wax and bans in the industry, and saw the opportunity that MountainFlo presented. So it was super fun to get on there. It was super fun to go back and forth with those guys on TV.
It was really impressive.
Yeah, it worked out well. Yeah, and then since then, it replays every couple months, and it's got a huge audience. It's a great show, and so it's been really good for the brand.
It's really a thrill. I have one distinct memory I have to share with you. As I mentioned, we started working on this in the year 2000. The summer of 2000 was our first foray. I sent a bunch of my scientists to work looking at this Teflon chemical, we called it at the time. We now know it's much more than just in Teflon. And so we were publishing investigations, going through internal industry documents, trying to tell the story to newspapers and media outlets. That was by day. And by night, my co-founder, brilliant scientist and advocate, Richard Wiles, he would go home. And in his basement, he had two kids. Both of them, his son in particular, were competitive skiers. So after working all day on the risks of PFAS, the likelihood of exposure, which we were just really beginning to understand then, right? He would go into the basement and wax his son's skis. And we joked about it at the time because right on the bottle or the container of the wax, it said Teflon or some other brand name like that, which obviously contained the stuff he was writing about, we were campaigning about and worried about even then. Of course, now the international community is aware of it, including, very impressively, the international ski community. So let's wind back, Peter. When did you first decide that you wanted to disrupt this industry? Because I know there are other companies that have come in since you pioneered some of the work you've been doing with MountainFlo, but what gave you the first instinct to do it, and how did you go about it? You're not a chemist, you're a skier.
Yeah.
And a scientist, businessman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the first question everyone asks me is, are you a chemist? And yeah, my answer is no, I'm just a skier. And I'd worked in the ski industry for years, 20 years, doing all sorts of stuff. And for a lot of that, I was a wax tech. For those people who don't know, if you're a wax tech, that means you're pretty much waxing skis all day long. And it's usually in kind of a small, cramped room, right? Because most of the ski shop is a retail floor where they're selling stuff, and the wax techs are in the back. And, I wax skis and I loved it, and I still do. And then one day I go, I wonder what wax is made of. Yeah, it must be made of wax, right? Like, what's plastic made of? Must be made of plastic.
Yeah.
And
what year was this? What are we talking about?
This is in the early 2000s.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe right before 2010.
Okay.
And so I started looking it up, and lo and behold, spoiler alert, anything that you don't really know what it's made of, chances are it's made of petroleum or some sort of petroleum-based derivative. And it turns out that wax, whether it's your ski wax or candle wax, is actually the remnant of the distillation process from a barrel of raw crude oil, right? You get the diesel and the gasoline and the mineral oil and all the other lubricants are distilled off. And what you're left with is this kind of black sludge at the bottom of the barrel. And that's wax, right? They take that, purify it, make it look white and nice, but it's the remnants of petroleum. And that's what I'd been breathing. That's what I'd been putting on people's skis and my own skis for years. And that just didn't sit well with me. And so that kind of started the process of hey, I know there's soy candles, so I know there's plant-based waxes out there. I should be able to make a plant-based ski wax. And soon into that process, I realized why no one else had done it, because it's really hard. The first few formulations I made, I could barely get off the chairlift because they were so sticky. But I was stubborn and I was determined. And it took me 2 years to figure it out because I'm a skier and not a chemist. But I did. I figured it out. And I came up with a formulation that works just as well, if not better, than the petroleum-based stuff. And in addition to doing no petroleum, obviously, I wanted none of the other bad stuff that was in there as well. And the leading candidate for ingredients in high-performance ski wax was, as you mentioned, PFAS.
And mostly Teflon. Now, I'm not going to show their brand name, but you now have the bike lubes too. But you can see on here, you can see the Teflon logo. This is a bike lube. This is the non-Teflon bike lube that you get from MountainFlo. And I've been using it on both my mountain bike and my road bike. When did you decide to add bike lube to your portfolio?
So this is something that people have been asking for a while. A lot of the ski shops we work with are also bike shops. And they say, look, we love what you guys are doing on the ski wax side. We really need something like that for bike. And so people had been asking for it. But it wasn't until the pandemic in the spring of 2020 when every single ski resort in the world shut down, right? And we didn't know when or if they were going to open back up. And if you're a ski wax company without any ski resorts, it's a precarious situation. And so we said, okay, this is the time. Yeah. Let's double down on the bike lubricant and let's figure it out. And so we put in the R&D, we did the research, and came out with a full line of plant-based, biodegradable, non-toxic bike products.
They work great, which I think is the thing to start with. We're involved with a lot of companies who are formulating personal care products, cleaning products, and so forth. One of the things that consumers sometimes immediately think is if it's sustainable, if it's clean and green and so forth, does it work? Is it going to be something good to put on my skin in terms of performance? Is it something that's going to clean my countertop, whatever the application may be? But your products really work, and that had to be the case after your first formulation that you couldn't get off the ski lift with. That had to be the case, right? It's a very competitive marketplace, and people want speed. So how did you figure out that it really works? How did you test it? And what was your reception amongst skiers when you introduced it early on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Ken, you probably know this better than anybody, but you really do have to lead with performance. People will tell you all day long that they want to buy products that are sustainably made and green and safe. And they do, but it's got to work, right? Really what they care about first is the efficacy and that it works. And then if it's green and sustainable and safe, that's an added bonus. So early on in the product development and even with our marketing, an industry vet said, look, you got to switch your marketing. You got to say high performance first, and then you say plant-based underneath it, because you really got to give people what they want. And so we were able to run some pretty scientific tests on our ski wax. It's called a speed trap. Essentially, you can think of it as a race course with a start line and a finish line with professional timing equipment. And you put different wax on 2 pairs of skis, and you put a tester on the course. And they run 10 laps with wax A and 10 laps with wax B. And then you crunch the numbers.
How do you get those jobs? How do people get those jobs? We're going to be flooded with
we'll
requests.
Put you up there as our next tester, Ken. We're working on some new stuff. Yeah, that was actually part of that was in the spring, the ski resorts had closed down and we had a little bit of time on our hands. And so we just were out there testing to try to get as much data as we could. And we got back into the office and crunched the numbers. And it was cool because it was completely objective, right? We didn't know which wax was which when we were out testing. We looked at the numbers and our wax was within 1% of everything on the market. We beat some stuff. We were just below other stuff, but kind of right in that competitive range.
Oh, fantastic. That must have made you feel great. And then you've, I think, since recruited some pretty high profile, or they've come to the brand and sing your praises, right?
We are fortunate to have some of the best skiers and snowboarders in the world on our team using our products. So Olympic medalists, World Cup champions, X Games medalists, all using our stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'm looking at a study on one of my other screens here. Skiers and snowboarders could be exposing themselves to harmful forever chemicals without realizing it. It's a study out of Boston University, just I think about a year and a half ago. It's kind of scary. Here you are, living that life of fresh air and beauty and purity and white snow, and yet beneath it all, there's this chemistry that is needlessly, as you've proven, needlessly causing contamination. There have been studies done showing elevated levels of PFAS in skiers. I don't know if, as a former wax tech, if you've had your blood tested, Peter, but it's literally banned, I think, from most of the competitive skiing associations, isn't it? You can't use fluorinated waxes. You have to use something else, right?
Yeah, so this is the first year that FIS, which is the international governing body for competitive skiing, instituted the ban. They tried to do it and they pushed it back 3 times. And this year they were able to implement it officially, which is great. It's a huge step in the right direction. Part of the problem is that all of this wax is still out there. And it's perfectly legal in most places for recreational skiers to use it. And a lot of people have it, in their wax bench, and they don't know what to do with it. And so that's another issue that we're trying to address, because you can't just throw it out in your municipal trash. And people end up using it because they've got it and it's expensive and they don't know what to do.
Yeah, no, and it's a problem across a wide range of consumer products, of course. Everything from makeup to floor wax. My scientist told me there was PFAS in all the waxes that are used commercially in schools and airports and hospitals. I just like, oh my God, that was another episode. But what do you do with your old, it's like a lump, right? It's like a lump of wax what do you do with it?
It's a lump of wax, and usually it'll say fluoro on there, so you'll know which wax has it, or it'll have HF or LF. Anything with an F stands for fluoro if you're talking about ski wax. And so we've actually implemented one of the world's largest fluoro wax take-back programs.
Oh, wow.
We take back all of this fluorinated wax from people who want to get rid of it. And right now we're just holding on to it for safe storage. What we do is help people to A, not throw it out, or B, not be tempted to put it on their skis. And we just had so many people asking us what to do that we said, look, just send it to us and we'll hold on to it. And so now we've gotten hundreds, probably thousands of pounds of wax returned to us. And we have receptacles that we've set up at ski shops and ski resorts so people can drop off the wax. And then we also get stuff sent to our office here in Colorado. We don't make any money from it. We lose money because it costs money for us to implement this program, but no one else is doing it. And we thought that someone should be.
What can people do to participate in your program to, get rid of that PFAS loaded ski wax and move on to something better like MountainFlo's products? What can they do?
So the easiest thing to do is Google MountainFlo Take Back Program. There's not many take back programs out there, so we're going to be right at the top of the search results. There's a landing page that will outline all of the details about how to send it back to us. If you have questions, you can also reach out. If you're wondering if your wax is safe or not safe, we're happy to help. Go to MountainFlo, mountainflo.com, and you can find everything you need.
Well, consistent with your leadership on this issue, I'm delighted but not actually surprised that you have taken these extra steps. What are you hearing from ski resorts about this issue? Because, every resort that has probably multiple shops or multiple places where waxes are being applied, there are going to be occupational exposure issues. There's going to be, what happens to all the wax that's on the floor? What kind of steps are you hearing about in the industry, Peter, to deal with that sort of secondary exposure scenario?
Yeah, so back in the day when fluoros were more prevalent, you would actually have like a fume hood, like you would see in a science lab, that'd be over your wax bench. In addition to that, the waxer would wear a full respirator, which, if you're putting on a respirator and working under a fume hood, that should be the first indication that something is not right here.
Ding.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was the standard for years. And now there is more evidence out there, there's more education. And so people have moved away from those toxic waxes. And we work with a lot of ski resorts that are waxing their entire fleets with our wax. And part of it is because they want to do the right thing for the environment. And part of it is that they want to protect their workers. And they don't want people exposed to the fumes that come off of, superheated wax day in and day out. So things are definitely moving in the right direction.
Well, that's right. And, like a lot of corners of the PFAS tragedy, as we refer to it, liability questions come in to play where people are doing that on their own. But the government still has a long ways to go to regulate. We have a designation proposal pending that certain PFAS will be considered hazardous substances under the Superfund law. We obviously have a proposal pending, and this is a big one, to regulate PFAS levels in drinking water to exquisitely low levels that still may not be entirely safe, but 4 parts per trillion, something in that range per trillion. So that's how hazardous, how toxic these chemicals are. And, they were used for decades and decades before the government even knew to be concerned, because the big companies didn't disclose what they knew to be some of the risks. And we've documented those in great detail on our website, as have others. And it's been the foundation of a lot of what EPA has done and civil litigation and so forth. But doing something that makes a difference in a sport like skiing really stands out in my mind as a great story to tell, because we really want to make sure that people understand that we need to take societal action. It's important to take the action you've taken and the ski industry's taken, but society needs to, deal with this. Unfortunately, I think the companies that produce this and profited from it aren't going to pay their full share of the cleanup, but we can't put the cleanup off just because they won't. But great companies like yours that are just saying, hey, we can reinvent this category. We can start from scratch and come up with something that's better. We didn't need it all along. It was dangerous all along. Are you looking forward now to additional products coming along that will build on this plant-based eco-wax technology that you've developed?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we developed a full line of bike products a few years ago. And, it was remarkably almost the same story, right? That's an entirely petroleum-based industry. And a lot of those also had PFAS in it.
Yeah.
And something that you mentioned earlier, where people assume that if it's green and sustainable, it can't work. And I was like, oh, bike lubricants, this might be tough. I don't know if we can match the performance. And as I dug in, what I learned was fascinating. Plant-based lubricants and greases are mandated in certain industries, such as agriculture, such as certain marine applications need to be using a plant-based oil and grease in case there's a spill. And same thing with agriculture. Or if you have a large machine, like a front end loader working in a river, it needs to use all non-petroleum products, which was eye-opening to me.
I did not know that. Yeah.
They're already in these massive pieces of equipment, and they're standing up and they're working just as well. And they're rated by the NLGI, National Lube and Grease Institute. So they have the same rating as a petroleum-based product. And so the idea that if it's green, it can't work is just not true anymore. And so we're really leaning into that as much as possible. We've got a new line of liquid wax that we're coming out with that we've been working on for a few years. So we're hoping to bring that to the market as soon as possible.
Oh, fantastic. It makes me think that it doesn't seem as if in the bike shop world or the cycling world, there has been the awareness that we have about these chemicals and products that you have in skiing. I wonder about that. What have you heard anything about what's happening in the bike sector on this?
Yes. I mean, a quick anecdote, we started working with this bike shop, and one of the bike techs pulled me aside and said, my favorite thing about using your products is that my boss doesn't make me wear rubber gloves when I'm working with it. He was like, the stuff we were using before, he was afraid I was going to have to, he was going to have to pay my medical bills because of the contaminants were going to make me sick for the rest of my life. And with your product, he feels safe. Yeah. And so he allows me to work with my hands so that I can feel what I'm doing and I'm not wearing rubber gloves. And I was like, I mean, that is just incredible that, you were subjected to something that was so toxic. You had to glove up to wear it. But I think the larger picture is that the bike industry is coming along, but a little bit slower. There's no bans on PTFE or PFAS in bike lube like there is on the ski wax side of things.
Right.
And it's just a more prevalent ingredient in a lot of the products that folks are using. And it's branded as such.
Yeah.
The example that you showed, it's right there on the package as
course.
a benefit. And really, it should be the opposite.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It should sort of be you should read that symbol as more like a skull and crossbones than something desirable.
Exactly.
Well, look, I appreciate your time, Peter. It's been so great to have you on the show. And I experienced a lot of episodes around PFAS, but this was one I was actually looking forward to because you have a solution set. And you've pioneered it. You've put your own hard work and capital behind it. I wish you the best of luck and thank you for your courage and your inventiveness and for going against the system in a creative way and bringing products to the public that solve a real problem. So thanks so much for that. Thanks for joining.
Ken, this has been a true pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for all the work you do.
You bet, brother. Peter and Diane, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank all of you out there for listening. If you want to learn more about PFAS or either of our guests, check out our show notes where you'll find additional links. Make sure to follow our show on Instagram at Ken Cook's Podcast, and if you're interested in learning more about EWG, head on over to ewg.org or check out the EWG Instagram account at Environmental Working Group. If you liked this episode, send it to a friend, and please leave a review. Today's episode was produced by the team at Full Picture Productions, and our show's theme music is by Moby. Thanks again for listening.